Work for small business. Get one advanced solution for the lowest price with Spectrum One for Business. Fast, reliable internet, free advanced Wi-Fi with Security Shield, and a free mobile line, all for only $49.99 per month. You're doing it all and can trust that Spectrum Business has your back with ultra-fast internet and over 99.9% network reliability. Plus, advanced Wi-Fi with Security Shield to provide 24/7 cyber protection. And get a free mobile line to stay connected all the time.
Connected to that.
Get Spectrum One for Business. One advanced solution with all the connectivity your small business needs for the lowest price. Only $49.99 per month. Call 855-581-6858 today. Spectrum Business. Made to work.
Got some soup for you.
You are loved. You are valued. You are resilient. You got this.
You are there for them. We are here for you. Find free care guides at aarp.org/caregiving.
Good evening, I'm Errol Lewis. You are watching Spectrum News coverage of the Republican National Convention. It's 10 p.m. on the East Coast, 7 on the West Coast, 9 p.m. at Fiserv Forum, Milwaukee. That is the site of the Republican Party convention, and the House is rocking. We are expecting to see former President Donald Trump. We know he's getting ready to come out. He's going to step out. The crowd's going to go wild any minute now. The now official Republican presidential nominee will be making his first public appearance since an assassination attempt over the weekend. Joining the former president on the ticket, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, who found out he's going to be the vice presidential nominee about 20 minutes before Trump posted the news on Truth Social. There's a lot going on here. The theme at the convention tonight is Make America Wealthy Once Again. The speakers so far have ranged from everyday Americans to Republican lawmakers, like Marjorie Taylor Greene. We're going to see the former president step in. There's J.D. Vance right there. There's the House band about to introduce the former president.
More prosperity.
That's Lee Greenwood, actually, singing. They're mixing in with the lyrics a little bit of politics, talking about food prices and the need to make America wealthy again, staying on target. There's the Speaker of the House of Representatives standing next to J.D. Vance, and there he is. Let's listen.
Trump.
If tomorrow all the things were gone, I'd work for all my life.
Our chief national political reporter, Josh Robin, is inside the arena. The mood there, I guess everyone was waiting for this, the emotional highlight of tonight so far, Josh.
Definitely. It's pretty subdued right now. That familiar song that greets Donald Trump's entrance is playing, and he's walking up the steps. As everyone has probably seen, his right ear is covered in a bandage. He's waving his right fist in the air, as he did after that assassination attempt. The former president looks relatively subdued. He's waving to his family.
And of course, he is a spectator tonight. He'll be watching the event from his special box there. Not expected to address the crowd tonight.
You know, Errol, it's really amazing in so many ways. Obviously, he could have been killed just a few days ago. That's number one. That's obviously the most important thing. But if you think about where the former president was after he lost, he was written off. And he has clawed his way back to the nomination of his party. And there is a very good chance that he'll once again be president of the United States. A striking turn of events over the last few years, and it seems like the last few years occurred just in the last week, even half a week, Errol.
Yeah, indeed. Leading in many of the polls, including in a lot of the crucial swing states. Plenty of time until the election, but if you want to win, it's best to be out front, and he is indeed out front according to the polls. So much so that some Democrats have begun to talk about replacing their candidate, President Joe Biden. For tonight, for those who are not familiar with how these conventions work, there will be others who are speaking, and Donald Trump will be watching. The nomination process, the formal part is over, but there'll be a number of speeches of people explaining why he should be the nominee. And then later in the week, we'll hear from the vice presidential candidate. He'll give a keynote speech. And then the highlight of the convention later in the week will be the time that Donald Trump accepts the nomination officially and delivers a speech. So tonight, kind of there for show, kind of there to get the crowd moving and to watch a lot of people praise him, praise this ticket, praise the party, and talk about the reasons why they should be leading the country. The headliner tonight, and we're going to bring you this speech in its entirety, is Sean O'Brien. He's the president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. That union endorsed President Joe Biden 4 years ago. They have yet to make an endorsement in this race, but his presence here tells you a lot. And so, Josh, is it fair to say nothing but good news here so far for the Republicans?
I would say so. I hope you can hear me, Errol. I do hear you fairly well over the chance of USA. You know, just in the last few hours, this arena has built up. There was definitely a lot of applause during the day. But I'd honestly have to go back. You and I have been covering these for a while. The kind of electricity that we see in this room, and now they're shouting fight, by the way, which is what Trump shouted after he was almost killed. But just to give a little historical arc here, Errol, we've gone to a lot of these conventions over the years. I don't think I've felt the kind of power in an arena since Obama back in 2008. Now it's We Love Trump, as you could probably hear behind me. The tide has really turned for the former president. This party is quite unified, much more unified than we were talking about only a few weeks ago. He has former rivals speaking. He has ahead in the polls, and he's survived this assassination attempt. Obviously, there are still challenges electorally ahead of him. It's actually quite close in polls, but it seems to be very much Trump's convention. There is no dissent. There's no never Trumpers holding up signs. It's a very tightly unified convention. This is being run extremely well. And we're obviously going to spend the vast majority of our time talking about the Republicans. But as of now, it's really much of a different angle on the Democratic side, where there are calls for that nominee, presumptive nominee, to step aside. Those have abated a bit since the assassination attempt, but nonetheless, very much the concern is there. This is a very tightly controlled convention. Donald Trump looks calm. He has the running mate that he wanted. It doesn't seem to be any kind of appeal to his detractors. Again, this is an electrified convention. Every one of these conventions generally tend to be very, very enthusiastic. But as I've mentioned, you and I have been covering these for a while. There's a real energy, a palpable energy in this room that I haven't felt since 2008, since Obama. We'll have to see if that translates to a victory. We still don't know.
Very interesting. Yeah, it's a world away from 2016. I remember being there in Cleveland, and the Texas delegation, one of the biggest ones there, did not stand up when Donald Trump came into the arena. It was a bit of a protest. They still had a candidate in the race. It was unclear if there was going to be a floor fight. That's all in the past. This is Donald Trump's party. This is a unified party as far as who's the candidate, who's the nominee, who's the big dog, and that is, in fact, Donald Trump. There's been a big focus on Donald Trump's running mate, Senator J.D. Vance. You see there sitting next to him. Let me bring in the rest of the panel. We've got a whole team here. Spectrum News national political reporter Taylor Popolars is with us, as well as political anchors Tim Boyum in North Carolina, Holly Gregory in Florida, Alex Cohen in California, Jason Fechner right there on the scene in Wisconsin. Now, Senator Vance spoke with Fox's Sean Hannity just a short time ago. Let's listen to what he had to say.
I grew up in a poor family. I remember when my grandmother, who raised me, she used to negotiate with the Meals on Wheels people to give her additional food so that she could feed me. How does a family like that deal with Joe Biden's grocery price inflation? How does a family like that deal with gasoline and energy price inflation? It's gotten more expensive just to live a good life in this country.
Now, Tim, this is a theme we've been hearing throughout the evening, that the prices are high, families are struggling, and that a new economic direction is needed.
Yeah, and this is, the economy and immigration are probably, outside of age, President Biden's two biggest vulnerabilities. And, it's from the top of the ticket all the way to the bottom. In North Carolina, every single race in the state, we've got a ton of them. We got one of the most competitive gubernatorial races in the entire country, if not the most competitive race in the country. And it's one of the major focal points that we're going to hear over and over and over. And the difference between J.D. Vance and what he could really help President Trump on this front is that story you just heard there. That's really relatable to a lot of Americans, where it's hard to relate to Donald Trump on these issues quite a bit. And so I think there's a powerful story to be told by J.D. Vance, and I think we'll hear more and more of that. The question is whether all the other side of him, how much that comes out, the previous statements that he's made, and I recognize that he's sort of changed his tone on Trump, but those are going to come out over and over. And of course, some of his stances on issues like abortion are going to be brought up over and over. But if they just keep pushing this economic issue, there's a lot of issues that impact the vote, but the wallet and the economy is almost always at the top at the end of the day once November rolls around.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, Holly, another theme that we've heard from J.D. Vance a lot, and he spoke about tonight in his Fox News interview, was talking about drugs and addiction. Let's listen to that.
Under Biden-Harris, prices are high. And expectations, well, they're low.
It's conservative values that restores hope. It's Republican policies that lifts people up. Under Donald J. Trump, we once again will have that rip-roaring economy that lifts up all Americans. That is our tomorrow.
Okay, a different clip than we expected there, Holly, but that in fact was more on the main theme of policies to lift up the country and help people do better at the family level. A lot of ordinary Americans mixed in with some of those well-known figures.
And J.D. Vance talked a lot in that interview about, growing up in poverty. He was raised by his grandmother because his dad really wasn't in the picture. His mom had addiction issues, and he talked about that addiction. And he said, my mom is here today and she can celebrate many years now being sober. And the reason that she can do that is because she had a chance to beat her addiction for drugs, because there wasn't fentanyl at that time. Whereas now we have fentanyl that is crossing the border, the components for it coming out of China, being made in Mexico, trafficked across our border, basically uncontrolled, 100,000 people a year dying of fentanyl overdoses. There's no coming back from an overdose of fentanyl. And so many of our young people he talked about, particularly in the Rust Belt, that is a huge issue, of young people dying to fentanyl, and the need to close down that border to get control of it and save a generation of kids who have become addicted who won't have the chance to recover from that addiction like his mother did if they get, a hold of too much fentanyl. It's killing so many people and has been just coming across the border unchecked.
We can't afford it.
Let's go down to the floor. Our Rena Diamante is talking with some of the delegates, some of the thousands of delegates who were there. And I imagine some of them have got to be really, really happy at this point, Rena.
Not a crooked career politician.
Oh yeah, they truly are excited. When former President Donald Trump and his vice presidential candidate walked into the room, these different VIPs, they were truly energized here. People got up from their feet. They were taking their selfies, taking their photos, taking their images, really paying attention to what he was saying and hoping to, get a close look of their candidate of choice. People were standing up on their seats. They were chanting, "We love Trump." A lot of them also were raising their fists and chanting, "Fight, fight, fight." Of course, that was something that is a reflection of what former President Trump said after he was attempted to, when someone almost took his life. And so certainly this room has been very energized, and especially with the choice of Senator J.D. Vance as his VP pick. One of the big, excitement is one of the most groups that have been most excited is the Ohio delegation here. They are among the people who've been incredibly energized here. And I want to bring in one of the delegates who is joining me with us today, Mr. Greg Simpson. You are an Ohio delegate. I mean, tell me, you must be incredibly happy, and so is your delegation, seeing former President Trump here and knowing that they've selected Senator Vance as his VP.
I'm very, very happy and very thrilled and just overwhelmed with the possibilities of the future. I really am.
What is it about Senator Vance that has impressed you?
Well, I've known him for quite some time, but he came from kind of a poor background, came from the same area of the state as I do, and I think he's really done a great job. He's worked his way up, and he's really a very modest person, and he was in the military like I was. And I just think the world of him. I think he'll do a great job.
What do you think he'll bring to the table, and how will he help the Trump campaign?
I think he'll bring to the table the average Joe. He came from that area, and a veteran's point of view. He'll bring that to the table. I think that's very, very important, that he's in the White House advising or helping President Trump.
Certainly the folks in this arena are very positive, very happy, but folks outside, critics of the former president, are looking to some of the past comments that Senator Vance has made, especially during the 2016 presidential campaign season. What are you concerned at all about that? Do you think that delegitimizes his campaign?
I don't think so. I think when you work together, you and I might disagree on things, but I can learn from your opinion, you can learn from my opinion, find a middle ground and move forward. I just don't think that's going to be much of an issue at all.
There's been a lot of calls for national unity in the wake of former President Trump's assassination. How do you tone down the political rhetoric, and do you think it's important that this country does?
Absolutely. What happened on Saturday was just atrocious, and this country's got to get over the hatred of different people. If you have a different idea than I do, that's okay. But we got to work together to find a common ground.
Greg Simpson of the Ohio delegation, thank you so much for your time. It was really nice chatting with you. And so certainly right now, former President Trump and a lot of the people in this room have been listening closely to a lot of the speeches that have been going on tonight. The theme of this evening is Make America Wealthy Again. So former President Trump in particular has been listening to speeches of everyday Americans. We heard from a small business owner, someone who has also been struggling, someone who's also been struggling to find housing and the like. And so that is the theme of the night, and that is something that I think former President Trump is looking to tap into, those feelings of struggling Americans, and he believes that Senator Vance is someone who can embody that. And given that Senator Vance is turning 40 next month, a lot of people believe that due to his young age, he can be someone who propels the populist message of former President Trump into the future. And so we're going to have different themes throughout this evening, and tomorrow I know that the theme of the RNC will be Make America Safe Again. Errol?
Okay, and now, Rena, you've talked with a lot of the delegates there. From where I'm sitting and from what our viewers can see, a lot of them, I mean, it could be a PTA meeting. It could be like the Lions Club or a civic group. They really seem to be kind of grassroots folks who are affiliated with and working on behalf of this party.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that what we're seeing is a whole range of different people. Certainly, there are state lawmakers here, but we're also hearing from Republican Party chairs, for example. But I did speak to an educator. I did speak to other entrepreneurs. And I think really the message here is trying to tap into some of these issues that are homegrown issues, whether it's struggling to pay for rent, whether it's struggling to pay for housing and those types of things. And that's really the theme of the night, and that's what people really want to hear, and that's what they've been clapping about, you know, as these different speakers come, and they're listening really closely what those folks have to say.
Okay, thanks a lot, Rena. We'll be back to you in a little bit. Taylor Popolars, you covered J.D. Vance for many, many years, so you're familiar with him and his rise. It seems like he walks this kind of tightrope between a vision of America that's in a lot of trouble and the kind of optimism that you need in order to get people to support you politically.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of putting it, Errol. I mean, as we just heard in that first interview he gave to Fox News, Vance, he wrote a whole book about his childhood in poverty and how he managed to kind of rise up from the ashes in a very dysfunctional family and still go to Ohio State, still go to Yale, serve as a Marine, become a venture capitalist, write a best-selling book that turns into a Netflix movie, and then run for office for the first time and get elected to the United States Senate. So he's somebody who, for many years now, has been incredibly successful and has lived a privileged life that he certainly earned himself, but he often invokes those humble beginnings as a kid and as a teenager in Middletown, Ohio, which is just north of the Cincinnati area in the southwest section of the state. And I think, Trump, when you look at who he has channeled to be his close advisors, to be his previous running mates, he always talks about, in kind of his reality TV background, wanting somebody out of central casting. And Vance has that kind of come from behind, come from the bottom story. He also has the Ivy League education that we know Trump really cares about. He's also somebody who, as several other folks have been mentioning, is young. He's turning 40 next month, and he's about half of Trump's age, and he's going to be able to really go out and campaign in an energetic way and kind of go to bat for Trump in a lot of ways that either maybe voters are frustrated hearing Trump go after in terms of attacks or the usual insults that he's leveled over year after year. I also think after this assassination attempt just 2 days ago, Trump has been calling for unity. We'll see if he sticks with that message, but he could now dispatch J.D. Vance to kind of be his attack dog. And Vance has a way of being very forceful and strong and critical, but also being very eloquent. It's where his intellect and his education kind of comes into play. Even when I covered him on the campaign trail, when he would speak at rally after rally after rally, these were small events in the early days of his Senate campaign. He's one of those people who he could go and give a presentation in a boardroom, but then he can also go to the middle of rural Ohio and talk about his upbringing, and people don't kind of feel ticked off by that. So it's a really interesting balancing act that I think seeing him do on the national stage in the months ahead is going to be fascinating to follow. But Trump seems to be drawn to it, and we've said it over and over again tonight, but JD is really good friends with Donald Trump Jr., and we know that the former president gets a lot of counsel from his family. So that's also something that really, really matters, that Trump Jr. was lobbying hard for Vance for months, and it paid off.
And Taylor, he does not, I guess, visibly scan as young, but he is very young for somebody about to assume this level of political prominence. The beard, I guess, helps him look a little bit older. Does he consider himself a generational leader?
I think he has certainly harbored at least presidential or vice presidential ambitions for a long time. Well before he launched his Senate campaign in July of 2021, he was a creature of Washington for several years. He and his wife Usha lived in Washington for several years before they moved back to Ohio. And he was somebody who he was a paid CNN contributor at one point. He went to all the thought leadership festivals, like the Aspen Ideas Festival, and he would talk on panel after panel after panel because his book kind of exploded onto the scene. And honestly, in Washington, a lot of the Washington elite and the media elite were really drawn to Vance because he was able to help explain in 2015 and 16 why white working class voters were drawn to Trump, when a lot of people were questioning why, for instance, in Northeast Ohio, that used to be deeply blue union steelworker territory, why that area, the Mahoning Valley, was able to convert to being Trump country. And now Trump wins there by double digits. Vance won there by pretty high margins during his Senate race. And so Vance is one of those people, if you talk to folks in Washington, D.C., Vance is one of those people who's been plugged in and talking with the insiders for years about his goals. It takes a lot in your 30s to say, I'm going to run for office for the first time and run for U.S. Senate rather than maybe city council or mayor from your hometown. So this is somebody who's incredibly ambitious and who has had his eye on a prize for a long time. I don't know if it's necessarily the presidency, but now he's getting very close to that potentially.
Okay, let me go to Josh Robin, who's there in the arena as well. And Josh, the idea of trying to present a leadership profile and a more conciliatory tone, something that Donald Trump alluded to on social media earlier today, it's not necessarily being followed by all of the speakers. I know you've listened to a lot more than I have, but I've heard about a dozen speakers, and a few of them have gotten in there and have been really pretty rough on President Biden.
Yeah, I did notice that. Also, the Trump attack commercials are playing here, so they have like Biden slipping on the stairs and struggling with his coat and having the First Lady help him. Look, this isn't, all of a sudden the convention has turned into a nice festival. It's not that at all. I would say, however, that I have noticed something with the people here, that they aren't screaming about Biden. They aren't screaming the kind of invectives that we've heard at other Trump rallies about fake media or fake news or, using kind of pejorative words on Democrats. So I want to stress that, yes, they're still very much attacking the other side here. I haven't heard what this latest speaker said, but people are booing, so I can only assume that it's talking about Biden. There we go. Just mentioned Biden, and his name is being booed. So, but there is something interesting. Apparently, Ron Johnson, the senator from Wisconsin, had kind of a pointed speech against Biden, attacking Biden, and then was asked about, wait a second, wasn't this supposed to be more of a conciliatory tone? And he said that a different speech went into the teleprompter. Whether that's actually the case, we don't know. I'm just saying what has been reported by us, or what he said. So we'll have to see if it comes from the top. I'm also going to be very curious to hear Vance speak about whether he talks about Biden in pejorative ways. Remember, just after the attempted assassination attempt, it was Vance, the VP nominee at this point, who said that it was the result of Biden's rhetoric that this person opened fire at this crowded Trump rally. Obviously, we have no evidence of that at all. We don't know what the shooter was thinking, and we'll have to see if that will be dialed back at all.
Hey, all right, thanks a lot for that, Josh. As I mentioned, Sean O'Brien, the president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, is going to be addressing this gathering. He just took the podium. Let's listen in.
I'd like to give my peeps from the greatest state in the nation, Massachusetts, some props. What's up? First, I want to thank the hardworking Teamsters and union members here in Milwaukee who play vital roles in the building and operations of this convention. I also want to thank President Donald Trump for opening the RNC's doors to the Teamsters Union and inviting me to speak before you tonight. I travel all across this country and meet with my members every week. You know what I see? An American worker being taken for granted. Workers being sold out to big banks, big tech, corporates, and the elite. And I'm not the only one who sees this. Everyday families see it. The American people aren't stupid. They know the system is broken. We all know how Washington is run. Working people have no chance of winning this fight. That's why I'm here today. Because I refuse to keep doing the same things my predecessors did. Today, the Teamsters are here to say we are not beholden to anyone or any party. create an agenda and work with a bipartisan coalition ready to accomplish something real for the American worker. And I don't care about getting criticized. It's an honor to be the first Teamster in our 121-year history to address the Republican National Convention. Several months ago, I asked the RNC and the DNC for the opportunity to speak. To be frank, when President Trump invited me to speak at this convention, there was political unrest on the left and on the right. Hard to believe. Anti-union groups demanded the president rescind his invitation. The left called me a traitor. And this is precisely why it's so important for me to be here today. Think about this. Think about this. The Teamsters are doing something correct. If the extremes in both parties think I shouldn't be on this stage. President Trump had the backbone to open the doors to this Republican convention, and that's unprecedented. No other nominee in the race would have invited the Teamsters into this arena. Now, you can have whatever opinion you want, but one thing is clear. President Trump is a candidate who is not afraid of hearing from new, loud, and often critical voices. And I think we all can agree, whether people like him or they don't like him, in light of what happened to him on Saturday, he has proven to be one tough SOB. Now, when I won the presidency of the Teamsters in a national election 2.5 years ago, we started reaching across the aisle. In the past, the Teamsters have endorsed GOP candidates, including Nixon, Reagan, and George H.W. Bush. But over the last 40 years, the Republican Party has really pursued strong relationships with organized labor. There are some in the party who stand in active opposition to labor unions. This, too, must change. And I want to be clear. At the end of the day, the Teamsters are not interested if you have a D, R, or an I next to your name. We want to know one thing. What are you doing to help American workers? As a negotiator, I know that no window or door should ever be permanently shut. In my administration, the Teamsters reached out to 8 Republican senators who stood up for railroad Teamsters over our fight for paid sick leave. Josh Hawley was one of them. We started talking. Senator Hawley changed his position on national right to work. Then we started walking. Senator Hawley walked a Teamsters picket line in St. Louis and a UAW picket line in Wentzville, Missouri. More than that, I want to recognize Senator Hawley for his direct, relentless, and pointed questioning of corporate talking heads, lawyers, CEOs, and apologists. He has shown he is not willing to accept their pillaging of working people's pocketbooks. I know from a career in negotiating that you get nowhere by slamming your fist on the table. The first step is to listen. The Teamsters and the GOP may not agree on many issues, but a growing group has shown the courage to sit down and consider points of view that aren't funded by big money think tanks. Senators like J.D. Vance, Roger Marshall, and Representatives Nicole Malliotakis, Mike Lawler, and Brian Fitzpatrick are among elected officials who truly care about working people. And this group is expanding and is putting fear into those who have monopolized our very broken system in America today. There are far too many people on both sides of the aisle still caught up in knee-jerk reactions to unions, who subscribe to the same tired claptrap that unions destroy American companies. Take a moment to consider United Parcel Service, which is the largest private sector logistics company, and it's been unionized for more than 100 years. More than 350,000 Teamsters make it run. We work for good middle-class wages, quality health care, and secure pensions. There are work rules that ensure fairness and due process for both sides. UPS is the most efficient package delivery company in the world. But let's not forget that UPS doesn't provide these great wages and benefits out of the kindness of its heart. UPS does it because the Teamsters fight for it, all 350,000 of us. You know, corporatists hate when working people join together to form unions. But for a century, major employers have waged a war against labor by forming corporate unions of their own. We need to call the Chamber of Commerce and the business roundtables what they are. They are unions for big business. And here's another fact. Against gigantic multinational corporation, an individual worker has zero power. It's only when Americans band together in democratic unions that we win real improvements on wages, benefits, and working conditions. Companies like Amazon are bigger than most national economies. Amazon is valued over $2 trillion. That makes it the 14th largest economy in the world. What is sickening is that Amazon has abandoned any national allegiance. Amazon's sole focus is on lining its own pockets. Remember, elites have no party, elites have no nation. Their loyalty is to the balance sheet and to the stock price at the expense of the American worker. In my office in Washington, D.C., I can see the United States Capitol from my window. I see well-intentioned people arrive in Washington and get eaten up by an unforgiving system. The responsibility to average Americans takes a back seat. The objective now becomes survival. Fundraiser after fundraiser, corporate consultants hedge every initiative. The Hill crawls with lifers, bouncing from government jobs to corporate jobs and back again. I think we can all agree D.C. is a pretty treacherous area. Most legislation is never meant to go anywhere, and it's all talk. And in America, talk isn't cheap. It's very expensive, and it comes at the cost of our own country. Working people know our system is broken. The elites are not laboring on behalf of workers. There is a political caste system that prevents citizens from accessing their representatives to hold them accountable. For a moment in time, working people in America were seen as essential. Sadly, it took a global pandemic for political and corporate elites to notice this fact. But ask yourself this question. Since the end of the pandemic, when was the last time you heard major news outlets regularly refer to workers as essential? You haven't. The men and women who provide goods and services, deliver packages, stock grocery shelves, care for patients, pick up your trash, and keep our communities safe are taken for granted. All the while, the stock market booms, housing prices hit record highs, and corporate salaries skyrocket. But the income of everyday Americans are shrinking in the face of inflation. At the gas pumps, at the grocery store, with the electrical bill, and with the car insurance. This has got to change. Never forget, American workers own this nation. We are not renters. We are not tenants. But the corporate elite treat us like squatters, and that is a crime. We've got to fix it. Now, this will shock you. This will shock you. To paraphrase Senator Mark Wayne Mullen, it's time for both sides of Congress to stand their butts up. We need trade policies that put American workers first. It needs to be easier for companies to remain in America. We need legal protections that make it safer for workers to get a contract. We must stop corporations from abandoning local communities to inflate their bottom line. We need meaningful bankruptcy reform. Today, corporate vultures buy up companies like Yellow Freight with the intent of driving them into bankruptcy and feasting on their remains. The courts leave workers begging for crumbs as third-tier creditors. Labor law must be reformed. Americans vote for a union but can never get a union contract. Companies fire workers who try to join unions and hide behind toothless laws that are meant to protect working people but are manipulated to benefit corporations. This is economic terrorism at its best. An individual cannot withstand such an assault. A fired worker cannot afford corporate delays, and these greedy employers know it. There are no consequences for the company, only the worker. We need corporate welfare reform. Under our current system, massive companies like Amazon, Uber, Lyft, and Walmart take zero responsibilities for the workers they employ. These companies offer no real health insurance, no retirement benefits, no paid leave, relying on underfunded public assistance. And who foots the bill? The individual taxpayer. The biggest recipients of welfare in this country are corporations, and this is real corruption. We must put workers first. What could be more important to the security of our nation than a long-term investment in the American worker? In 2021, Teamsters nationwide elected me to fight for them, and that's precisely what I'm doing. Something is wrong in this country, and we need to say it out loud. I will always speak for America and the American worker, both union and non-union. I challenge each and every one of you, and especially my friends on the Democratic side, to embrace cooperation, to truly collaborate, to achieve meaningful and productive change, to ensure we make this great nation in this world the bigger, faster, and strongest nation in the entire world. I love this country. The Teamsters love this country. Our 1.3 million members move America on the roads, in the ports, on the rail, and in the air. And at the end of the day, if the powers to be stop me from raising my voice on behalf of American workers, I will not have one single regret. I still carry my commercial driver's license. I still have my place on the union seniority list. You'll find me back in Boston driving a tractor-trailer, delivering equipment for Shaughnessy and Ahern, because I have the protection of a union contract that gives me the freedom to speak my mind and to fight like hell. God bless the greatest nation. Thank you very much.
All right, Sean O'Brien, the president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, making history for the first time in over 120 years of that union's history, a leader of the Teamsters Union addressing the Republican National Convention, saying not necessarily an endorsement, but clearly a willingness to try and have a different kind of a conversation than any of his predecessors, making a lot of history there. Let's go to our panel. We've got a lot of folks who know a lot about this, and I want to start with you, Jason, right there in Wisconsin. Not the kind of thing you normally hear from a union leader.
No, not at all there, Errol. And the graphic that we had on the screen basically said it all. Teamsters president addresses GOP convention. That might be as valuable or even more valuable than an endorsement down the road here. Clearly, the crowd at Fiserv Forum just across the street from where I am right now really loved hearing Sean O'Brien talk about Donald Trump, really loved hearing about the Teamsters being there at the RNC, and then a bit of a mixed bag on the applause for a number of the points that he proceeded to make throughout this primetime address there. Union membership, of course, when it comes to Joe Biden's chances going forward and potentially Donald Trump's chances going forward as well, could prove to be critical. 12.9% union membership in the state of Pennsylvania, 12.8% union membership in the state of Michigan, and 7.4% union membership across the state of Wisconsin. Those are the three states, of course, that the Biden administration and the campaign have pointed to as being critical for their reelection chances. If all other states fall the way they are leaning right now in most national polls out there, according to the map from RealClearPolitics.com, those three states potentially get Biden to 270 electoral votes come November. There are cracks in that union support, of course, for Biden going forward. Simply having Sean O'Brien there tonight is a bit of a crack, though Politico reported that a lot of membership from the Teamsters was upset that he was speaking in prime time here on this Monday evening. But the National Education Association, there have been some voiced concerns at state and local levels about their union's endorsement of President Joe Biden going forward into November. And Sean Fain with the AFL-CIO saying they can't really put their head in the sand about what's happening out there either. Yes, Joe Biden has the majority of union support. He says he's the most pro-union president of all time going forward, but there are some cracks in that support, of course. And CNN earlier tonight with some new reporting out there that despite obviously the Democratic challenges to Biden's candidacy falling out of the headlines with the assassination attempt this weekend, with the RNC kicking off on Monday evening, he says that there are a lot of private conversations still going on out there about replacing Biden at the top of the Democratic ticket, namely from an internal Democratic pollster, Stanley Greenberg. They have been sending a lot of information Biden's way, saying that he is set up right now for a lose-everything scenario in November and devastating results as well. So in the midst of the RNC getting the headlines right now, a lot of potential cracks for Joe Biden going forward.
Okay, very interesting. Let me go to Tim Boyum. This is not the kind of thing you normally hear from a union president, although he did sort of go to some of the talking points you do hear from labor leaders about the need to get a contract, the need to have fairer treatment from corporations. And as Jason suggested, it sounded like the applause died down a little bit at that point.
Yeah. I live in North Carolina and covered politics here for 2 decades, and I would have loved to have a camera just focused on the North Carolina delegation. Just consider a few things about North Carolina. It was put into state law that banned public workers from publicly bargaining in 1959. Since then, it's still a misdemeanor for public workers to strike. Obviously, a right-to-work state, the second least unionized state. Less than 3% of North Carolinians are union members, and Republicans routinely criticize a teacher group in North Carolina by calling them a union. And just last year, a number of powerful Republican lawmakers tried to put forward a constitutional amendment on the ballot to put right to work in a state constitution, one of those who is likely going to be the new House Speaker next year. Now, that has not happened yet, But it's just remarkable to hear what we just heard on stage versus where Republicans in a lot of states like North Carolina, what they feel about unions. It's just a yet another fascinating moment.
Absolutely. And Holly, let me go to you. I mean, this is, again, somewhat unusual. Sean O'Brien, of course, making no secret about that and kind of calling attention to the fact that he's doing what union presidents before him have not done ever in the case of the Teamsters Union.
And I listened to an interview with him, tonight before this speech, and he was actually praising J.D. Vance as the pick for Trump's running mate. And you think J.D. Vance, he grew up as a poor kid in a steel town that essentially died economically when NAFTA came around, the trade deal that then you saw a lot of manufacturing jobs leaving the U.S. for cheaper labor in Mexico and other foreign countries. And a lot of those steel towns just died. It happened in the Midwest, too, with food processing plants. I saw that happen in my community. But Trump was, at the time, even though he was in real estate, he was very vocal against NAFTA. And so, J.D. Vance really understands that, having lived that in his community. But what you just heard Tim say there, a lot of the same is true here in Florida. We're also a right-to-work state, so there's a lot of anti-union sentiment. Under Ron DeSantis, there have been a lot of new laws passed that are basically union busting, made it so that you can't automatically collect dues out of somebody's paycheck. Now, a lot of that was directed at the teachers union because there was such a fight in the state over COVID in the schools. But yeah, Republicans sort of have this love-hate relationship when it comes to the unions. But I did look something up in preparation for this speech tonight, and something to consider here. The average Teamster salary in Florida is $16.16 an hour. It's a little bit more if you're a Teamster trucker. That's $26 an hour. But just think about this inflation economy that we have. If you have a family that you're raising on $16.16 an hour, you're someone who is right now the working poor. A few years ago, before inflation jumped up to 9% and has been slowly coming down, or at least increasing at a lesser rate, we have all done stories in our Spectrum news stations across the country, many here in Tampa Bay, with food pantries that are saying, we're seeing people we've never seen before. We've interviewed people who've said, I never thought I'd find myself in this position. I work so hard. I make too much to qualify, for other types of help. But I cannot afford this economy that we live in. If you live in the margins, if you just make enough to pay the bills, and then suddenly up goes these prices across the board, you're hurting, and it's cumulative hurt. It's hurt over the course of 2 years now, Errol. And so a lot of these Teamster union people, they're not making it. They're struggling.
Alex Cohen, in a very pro-union state like California, something like what we just saw, the message would be familiar, but the setting would be very unusual.
It would, and it's interesting too, Errol, to mention there, Sean O'Brien was talking about these big companies like Uber and Lyft. And interesting to note that, yes, here in the Golden State, which has long been a very pro-labor state, there have been tensions brewing for quite some time as we've seen these new industries really disrupt the working world that so many folks have known. And despite being a very pro-labor state, hundreds of millions, the most expensive ballot measure spending ever seen here in California, went to defeat an initiative which would have had those who work for companies like DoorDash and Lyft be employees who receive benefits. And I'll tell you what, it was a mixture of folks, but especially those within California's Republican Party who did not like that idea whatsoever, and the doors it would open in terms of what they would have to pay in a state that's already incredibly expensive to do business in. I think this moment we saw with Sean O'Brien tonight will be one of them that, certainly went over very well with the crowd on the floor, the working men and women who were delegates, but I think there's going to be a lot of parsing out about where the Republicans actually stand. New York Times reporting that some of those lines actually saw J.D. Vance cheering and clapping, whereas former President Trump didn't have that same response. So I think this is, as much as J.D. Vance and Donald Trump, a really great match in a lot of ways, there might be areas of friction. It'll be very interesting to see how that plays out in the 100+ days that we have left until Election Day.
Okay, absolutely. Let's go to Rena Diamante. She's on the floor there at the convention. The main speech of the night has ended. I already see some empty seats. You're going to grab some folks, I hope, before they all head out. Rena.
Yes, hopefully. I did hear Tim Boyum, who covers North Carolina, and he said he wanted to talk to someone or hear from someone from the North Carolina delegation. I have here with me Kay Wilt. You just heard the Teamster official just talk about his speech regarding, a very pro-union speech as well. And we saw former President Trump and his VIPs in that box stand up. What was your reaction to hearing that?
I was so proud, first of all, proud to hear that the Teamsters union leader cares about both union members and non-union members. He only cares about America and its people. And I was proud to hear that he's been working with President Trump to open opportunities for regular American workers, because the American family, I represent women in North Carolina, American families are hurting, and we need a change desperately.
Certainly that's been the theme of the night, Make America Wealthy Again. Our crews, our journalists in North Carolina, they cover the State House very closely. They cover a lot of what the Republican leaders are doing. And there have been some efforts at the state level to restrict the power of unions and their authority, it seems. What do you have to say to that? And how do you think Republicans in North Carolina, or even just some of those independent voters that don't necessarily know who they're going to vote for in this coming election, how should Republicans try to tap into that pro-union message?
Actually, the message is pro-American, not just pro-union. I think that Republicans stand absolutely on par with what the union leader is trying to do. We want what is best. If you think about it, North Carolina last year was named #1 for business in America. And we want employment for our people, as we do for all Americans. So, yes, whatever is good for American families, that's what Republicans want.
And then my last question, North Carolina is a very important swing state for this election. What are you hoping to hear from former President Trump as he speaks later this week? What do you hope to hear from his VP candidate, Senator Vance?
Oh my goodness. President Trump, as we've already known, had policies 4 years ago that were so wonderful. Our border was secure. Families could be fed. I mean, it is tragic right now. I can speak about North Carolina. Yes, there are communities that are fine, but we have a lot of people who are suffering terribly. So what I'm going to hear from President Trump and J.D. Vance will be policies that will help the regular people.
Kay Wilt of the North Carolina delegation, thank you for stopping by. I know everyone's leaving, but I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. And so, Errol, that's just some of the reaction that we've been getting from all the different speeches that we heard tonight, but also with that grand finale with Sean O'Brien, a Teamsters official. So this was really the message of the evening, make America wealthy again. And I think that there's no surprise that Senator J.D. Vance and his being selected as the vice presidential nominee, there's no surprise that that came today, because what I'm hearing from a lot of these Republican delegates is that Senator Vance embodies the American dream. He has a story to tell when it comes from, a hardscrabble, growing up in the hardscrabble Appalachia and being able to make something of himself despite his upbringing. And so that's something that a lot of Republican delegates hope that J.D. Vance will be able to tap into. I actually also caught up with Congressman Jim Jordan. He is of Ohio, and he's a really important figure in Washington. He's the leader of the House Judiciary Committee. I got to chat with him really briefly as he was making his way through the arena, and he essentially said that J.D. Vance is the embodiment of the American dream and that he'll be able to send a good message and to be able to tap into some of those problems that everyday Americans have been facing. Errol.
Okay. Thanks very much, Rena. Great work tonight. Let me go to Tim Boyum in North Carolina. We've only got a minute up till the top of the hour, but what's your reaction to the North Carolinian we just heard from?
I think you're seeing the challenge of trying to sort of toe that line between supporting the American worker, yet a state that doesn't necessarily support unions, definitely not in the way that we heard tonight from the prime speaker there. But I do think there's this connection they're clearly trying to make to this base of American workers that are struggling out there. And a lot of that is how Donald Trump rose to power in 2016 to try to broaden that base, perhaps by bringing in some of these union workers. And tonight might have been a chance to try to do that. I just think the policies that were talked about tonight are not going to go over well in states like North Carolina and states that are right-to-work states.
Right, right. I was thinking of Wilbur Ross, who was the Commerce Secretary in the first Trump administration. And that was a guy who did, for a living in his corporate life, pretty much everything that Sean O'Brien was decrying. I mean, he was what they call a vulture capitalist. He'd go and find old industrial companies, buy them up, strip them to the bones, basically lay off as many people as necessary, and walk away with a profit. I mean, I'm not sure Sean O'Brien really understood the nature of the crowd that he was talking to.
Well, what was weird, it sounded like he said, look, I asked both parties if we'd come speak at their convention, and the Republicans said yes, so I came. That's just the way it kind of felt.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
It's just remarkable.
Yeah, and we should always keep in mind that union leaders like Sean O'Brien are themselves elected officials. He's got 1.3 million members all around the country, and he is looking for votes as well. So I'm Errol Lewis. Welcome you. If you're just joining us, you're watching Spectrum News coverage of the Republican National Convention, where Donald Trump is now the official presidential nominee of the Republican Party. Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio is his running mate. Trump has had a string of great news recently, starting with the Supreme Court ruling in his favor on presidential immunity. He also sat back watching tonight while the Democrats have been debating about removing President Biden at the top of the ticket. He was in an arena full of tens of thousands of people cheering for him and screaming his name. Some other good news, he got a big legal victory where Judge Eileen Cannon down in Florida dismissed the classified documents case against the former president. Special prosecutor Jack Smith is going to appeal the decision, but he basically has to start at scratch if he wants to try and continue with a prosecution. The Justice Department will have to go back to square one. So let's I guess, break down some of this. Let me start with you, Taylor Popolars. Let's talk a little bit about that legal case, the ruling that came down today. Why was that case dismissed out of Florida?
Yeah, Errol, I mean, there's been so much news over the last few days that I think this headline, while it got coverage, it also got completely buried just in the aftermath of this assassination attempt on Saturday, and then the announcement of Senator J.D. Vance as the president's running mate, or former president's running mate today. This case was arguably one of the toughest that Donald Trump was facing of the 4 criminal cases against him. This was a literal physical paper case, classified documents being taken away from the White House when they shouldn't have after Trump left office, and being found at his Mar-a-Lago resort in boxes, in bathrooms, unorganized, unprotected, et cetera, and then additional charges that Trump and his colleagues intentionally tried to withhold evidence from investigators as they were there to collect them. Judge Eileen Cannon, who we need to point out is a Trump-appointed judge. She got named to the bench when Trump was in office. She wrote in about a 90-page announcement, or decision, if you will, today, that she did not feel that Special Counsel Jack Smith, the person in Washington, D.C., who was appointed and was overseeing this case, she did not feel that his appointment was basically legal or constitutional or right in the first place. And this is separate from the federal January 6th case that Trump is facing, because Jack Smith is also the special counsel overseeing that. And Cannon, in her description of everything today and in her decision, she said, I'm not talking about the January 6th case. I'm strictly talking about this classified documents case. But she dismissed it. It doesn't necessarily do away with the merits of the charges that Trump is facing. But this judge said, I don't feel this case should proceed simply because of how the special counsel was appointed and whether or not that should have been warranted. So this completely blows out of the water any chance of this case proceeding forward between now and November. It could be appealed, and the special counsel's office indicated that they're going to pursue that. But this could end up back at the U.S. Supreme Court, which people might remember is now a 6-3 conservative majority because Donald Trump was able to nominate and appoint so many justices to that bench. So it's a really stunning development. And as you were saying, for Trump, this is a lot of good news for the investigators who spent months putting that case together and documenting just how much, these classified documents were improperly stored. And then there was all this resistance to returning them when the government was trying to get them back. This is a big setback for them, but it's just a truly kind of head-spinning series of events, because while the crowd here was so happy and thrilled and emotional to see Donald Trump, and the country is, of course, happy to see him standing and only have a bandage on his ear after a bullet got so close to his head. This is also a reality that this is a former president who right now is a convicted felon and who right now is facing multiple other criminal charges in multiple other investigations, that even today he is baselessly claiming that Joe Biden and the Democratic Party are trying to go after him with what he calls lawfare. So it's really kind of head-spinning, but that's where things stand there.
Yeah, a lot of news happening all at once. Very true, Taylor, and we should make clear for our viewers that the legal jeopardy is still real, and some of these other cases are not touched by today's ruling. So, for example, in Fulton County, Georgia, that case goes forward. The sentencing around the conviction in New York, that goes forward. This particular case, which struck down the whole idea of having a special prosecutor, is going to be contested, but all of these, or many of these cases, will be resolved after Election Day, meaning the legal troubles are not going to necessarily impact the immediate presidential political prospects of Donald Trump. Now, President Joe Biden gave an exclusive interview to NBC's Lester Holt tonight. He asked Biden about Trump and a comment that he made about him that may have been construed as really kind of leading toward or suggesting the possibility of violence. This is something that President Biden, a comment that he made to donors last week. Some Republicans say that he was inciting violence. Let's listen to some of that interview.
The truth of the matter was, what I guess I was talking about at the time was, there was very little focus on Trump's agenda.
Yeah, the term is bullseye.
It was a mistake to use the word. I didn't say crosshairs. I meant bullseye. I meant focus on him. Focus on what he's doing. Focus on his policies. Focus on the number of lies he told in the debate. Focus. I mean, there's a whole range of things.
Okay, we've got a panel here to help analyze this and much more. Josh Robin is with us, also Jason Fechner, Holly Gregory, as well as Alex Cohen in California, Tim Boyum in North Carolina. And Josh, this was presumably intended to be counter-programming against the Republican National Convention. Did that particular section do what President Biden needed it to do?
No. I mean, I think a lot of people out there didn't know that Biden had even used that expression bullseye, and then he kind of awkwardly explained that he obviously didn't mean it in any kind of violent way. But I don't think that it was entirely helpful for Biden. I think at best it was neutral. It didn't do any of that. And look, all of this comes, as we've talked about, Biden is giving this interview, presumably because he needs to boost his poll numbers. There's some remaining concern that he is not the best man to take on Donald Trump. And as we've talked about, Errol, Donald Trump has had an incredibly good few days in not just politics, in life and death, but in politics as well. With the legal cases going his way, with Biden having an awful debate. The life and death part is that Trump obviously survived, and he came up looking really strong, and it has brought this Republican Party together in a way that we didn't think was going to happen only a few weeks ago, when there were still people voting in the primaries, voting for Nikki Haley in the tens of thousands. He was not getting the full support of his party. Now he is here today, or he just left, and he has a convention that has gone really well. It's really just been very crisp. There's been no booing of any of the nominees. The fact that J.D. Vance was selected shows, as we've pointed out, as Holly has pointed out, I think shows accurately that he feels confident in his chances. Again, we're a long way away from the election. Things tend to move very quickly these days in politics, as these last few weeks have borne out. But right now, I think Donald Trump is sitting pretty, and we'll have to see if that lasts and whether he is more conciliatory and someone who is able to bring in the many millions of people who do not want him to be president, whether he changes his tone or not.
Oh, yeah, there'll be a different conversation going on when the Democrats meet next month in Chicago, for sure. Let's go back to the floor of the convention. The delegates are streaming out, but our Rena Diamante is there, catching a few of them on their way out the door. Rena.
Yes, Errol, I managed to keep a few with us today, and I think that goes to show how much Spectrum News covers the North Carolina delegation. And it sounds like she's about to leave real soon. I got Mary Frances Forrester. Ma'am, you were saying that today you've been going to conventions since 2004, but today the feeling around the RNC feels different. Why do you think that is?
I think Saturday had a lot to do with it. I think it woke us up. I think it woke a lot of people up. Those who, it reminds me of 9/11. We saw unity. We saw working together, and I hope we're still going to move in that direction. That's what we want to do. We want to all love America and be able to move forward.
What excited you in terms of what you heard tonight on the floor, the different speeches that you heard?
I liked every one of them. I loved hearing from personal stories or histories. My husband was also an immigrant from Scotland who came to this country and lived the American dream. And they were living the American dream. And that's the emphasis that we're looking here, is to restoring the American dream so that the people who work hard and want to do well can do well, and they'll have that opportunity to reach their potential. That's what America's all about.
Former President Trump stood up throughout the entire speech that was given by the Teamsters official Sean O'Brien. I know that there are some efforts, perhaps with Republicans in North Carolina, to try to limit the authority of certain unions and the like. Do you think Republicans will be able to tap into, though, the labor movement and to be able to win the labor vote? How do you do that?
I don't know. If I had that answer, we would solve this whole problem, wouldn't we? North Carolina is a right-to-work state. And so the unions and North Carolina have not always agreed. I can't tell you what the end result, but this is a beginning. It is a beginning.
And how do you think Senator Vance will help the Trump campaign, and especially tap into some of those North Carolina independent voters? Certainly this state is a big swing state, and one that Trump and President Biden will want to win.
I'm very impressed with J.D. Trump loves surprises, so it was a surprise to me, but we knew he was being considered. I'm especially impressed with his military background. We haven't had anyone in the administration with a military mind in a good while, and in the situation of the world today, we need a military presence, or someone who's been there and knows what they're talking about. He's also had a broad experience with a social background and life and experiences. I think he'll be able to serve well because he can contribute what others feel where maybe Trump has not been there personally.
Mary Frances Forrester, thank you so much for sticking around. I really appreciate it. I know your ride's here, ma'am. Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. Okay, so that's really something that we've been hearing from a lot of Republican delegates when it comes to the messaging that we're hearing today and the selection of Senator Vance as Trump's vice presidential pick. This idea that this is a person who represents what working class families are going through and can speak to that struggle and the struggle of what it could mean to fulfill the American dream in this day and age. And so the theme today was Make America Wealthy Again. And there's a lot of different themes throughout the week that really invoke Trump's signature slogan. And so tomorrow it'll be Make America Safe Again. And so I think there will be a lot of discussion around border policies and immigration policies, which I know is a really big issue for a lot of Republican voters. Errol.
Okay, thanks very much, Rena. And let's go back to Tim in North Carolina. I mean, Tim, there's going to come a point where what's wanted and what's needed for working families in North Carolina and elsewhere is going to have to, I guess, connect with and maybe find some kind of a home or connection with what's actually in the Republican platform.
Yeah, first of all, I promised I didn't pay all the North Carolina delegates to go around Rena to get them on TV tonight, but it is great to hear. You can tell, how could you not love North Carolina? Look, this whole discussion of unions in North Carolina, I just don't think it's going to happen. Are they trying to connect to these workers that possibly could come in? But they're not going to support platform reform about unions when it's been such a big part of the state since 1959. A lot of those people in that North Carolina delegation, as other delegations, are still upset about LGBT issues related to the platform and also abortion issues related to the platform. I just don't think labor is high on their agenda to bring those people in. Now, can they connect to them about the issues that are hurting these workers, they believe, and that they believe that Joe Biden is the cause of that? 100%. And I think that's what they're going to try to do if they can lure some in. But I'd be willing to bet if you talk to all the folks in the delegation in North Carolina, they probably didn't know who that person was that went up on stage tonight. I'm not sure it impacted them a whole lot of way, but it's been fascinating to watch.
Yeah, no, very, very interesting, very true. Let me go to Jason. The president, Joe Biden, was supposed to be in Austin today. He gave that NBC interview tonight. Apparently, the assassination attempt on Donald Trump led the Democrats and Joe Biden in particular to change his campaign plans. What's he up to? I mean, I guess this was supposed to be a chance to do a little counter-programming, but it looks like it's off to kind of a strange start.
Well, and I think for the Biden campaign right now, everything had kind of been suspended temporarily in the wake of the assassination attempt on Saturday. And I wonder what their schedule is going forward right now, because in part, Donald Trump was so adamant to stay on schedule, posting to Truth Social on Sunday that despite the attempted assassination and the would-be assassin, he's sticking to his schedule. He's still coming to Milwaukee, and sure enough, he rolled into Milwaukee on Sunday night. He's there at the RNC today. And there was reporting from NBC out as well that they didn't want speakers to change their speeches in the wake of the assassination attempt, in part because they didn't want everyone talking about it. So for the most part right now, it's business as usual for the Republicans. And as you could see throughout the course of the RNC night one there at Fiserv Forum, it was a big party there. So I wonder if, because the Republicans are on track and on message going forward, if the Biden campaign gets back on track, back on message going forward, and continues to kind of go forward with business as usual for the Democrats, if there is, at this point, business as usual for the Democrats.
Okay, yeah, that's a very good point. And Holly, let me bring you in on this. If the Democrats are going to pull their punches, pull down their advertising, and the Republicans just kind of march forward with the business as usual, it gives them that much more of an advantage this week.
Well, and in fact, we know that Vice President Harris, she was actually supposed to be in Florida. She had a trip scheduled to South Florida tomorrow, when what happened to President Trump over the weekend, they suspended all campaigning. So Harris suspended that trip as well. She was going to come here to Florida to talk about abortion, but they'll get back to it, Errol. They have to. And that's going to be a topic I think you're going to see Harris has already been very much out front on, it, particularly here in places like Florida that have very, very strict abortion laws, a 6-week abortion law. We're going to have that before voters in November to decide if they want to reinstate abortion rights in our state. So she's been here several times to talk about that, and I think she'll be back, and that's going to be a real contrast contrast between Harris and J.D. Vance, who is so very, very pro-life. He has since taken up the mantle of what Donald Trump is saying, and Trump has moderated on this issue because he knows which way the political winds blow on it. And he has said, you know, this is a states' rights issue. This should never have been decided by a bunch of people in robes and justices. This should be decided close to the people. And Florida's going to have an opportunity to weigh in on that. But that's going to be a real dividing line between Harris and Vance when they do debate coming up. And they're both saying that they're ready to do that. That could happen very soon. But this, you know, this pick of J.D. Vance, just to reiterate here, this is such a bullish pick by Trump, and that abortion issue is one reason. You know, he knows that's a political liability for him, and even with Vance's stance, he's still going through with J.D. Vance, and he's saying, you know, I don't need to pick someone just because they're a woman. I don't need to pick someone just because they're a minority or someone from a swing state to get that electoral advantage. I'm going to pick who I think is best and who is going to pick up and carry the MAGA mantle, even if, you know, maybe some others may say, you know, J.D. Vance has too extreme views on certain topics. Trump is feeling very, very bullish here with this pick, and that's why he tapped J.D. Vance.
Okay, and now, Alex Cohen, you've covered California politics for a long, long time. You're familiar with Kamala Harris, who, of course, was a local prosecutor, state attorney general, senator from California, now the vice president, who I would imagine is chomping at the bit to get to a debate with J.D. Vance.
I think that's right, Errol, and there are plenty of memes on the internet tonight to prove it, showing, you know, old footage of Kamala Harris kind of chuckling and smirking, the idea of someone who has been in politics for so many years, debating a senator who has only really been in elected office for a short bit of time. Interesting to note, too, Errol, you know, on the one hand, although these two couldn't be more different, they actually do share some things in common. Both having attended law schools, having that legal background. J.D. Vance is known for his time in Kentucky and Ohio, but he actually spent a fair amount of time in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is, again, where he made all those connections to big tech titans who we now see funding Donald Trump's campaign. Earlier this evening, Tim Benvoya made a point, and I agree with him, right? A vice presidential pick in the end probably isn't going to make too much of a difference, especially when your two front runners are people like Donald Trump and Joe Biden. That said, I think there's going to be a real fighting mood when that debate happens. And don't forget, later on this week, we're expected to see a UFC champ, Dana White, appear at the convention. I think Americans, I hate to say it, politics, and I'm going to say this delicately in light of what has happened, but in many ways, politics has become a blood sport. And I think Americans are tuning in for that conflict, that fight. And I think that that's what many people will look forward to in a Kamala Harris, J.D. Vance lineup.
Well, yeah, I mean, and look, we talk and we will be talking, as is appropriate this week, about the Republican base, but there is a Democratic base, and Kamala Harris comes straight out of it. We're going to hear from that base, and they want a fight just as much as anybody else.
I think that's right. And yet, Errol, I also think it's very complicated when it comes to Kamala Harris. She's got a lot of people who support her. We actually saw even more of a swell of support in recent weeks as we heard these talks after the debate about whether or not President Biden should step aside. That said, Kamala Harris is a complicated figure, and she is polarizing even within the Democratic Party. I have talked to Democrats, women of color, who will say, oh, I just can't stand Kamala Harris. And when you press them, they can't really explain why. It's more of a style than a substance issue. And I think it'll be interesting, you know, also within the Republican Party, mixed feelings about J.D. Vance among some. I think there's going to be continue to be some complicated feelings around Kamala Harris as well.
Okay. And Josh, I've got a question for you. When we hear the Republicans take the stage, one speaker after another, some of it scripted, I guess most of it vetted at least, they've been fairly upbeat. There have been a couple of attacks here and there, but fairly upbeat about a race that I guess they imagine they're going to win. That's in real contrast to the sort of American carnage message that we've heard in the past from Donald Trump.
Yeah, it is. I think that there has been, and some reporting is bearing this out, there has been a real attempt from the Trump campaign to get people to speak more optimistically, to get people to speak more, less diabolical about what the situation is, and less contentiously with regards to Joe Biden. I think there's a fair share, though, of maybe not American carnage, but definitely life under the Biden administration is not being painted as particularly positive here. They talk about gas prices, they talk about home ownership being out of reach, they talk about inflation, making just simple groceries more difficult. I mean, there's a lot of fact checking that we can do on that. I'll mention that in a moment. But overall, yes, I would say that this isn't a hugely doom and gloom convention. I think it's just an extremely pro-Trump convention. Before, I think there was a lot of expectation that would be very anti-Biden. That's still here, but because of what happened to Trump over the on Saturday in particular, I think this is really just people extremely excited about the person who many of them believe has been saved by God and by God itself. As far as the fact-checking is concerned, I'll just briefly mention that obviously, as we know, inflation has been higher than in recent years recently, but that has gone down significantly. So that's just one fact-check to mention, as people do say that we are in the grips of inflation. It's still elevated, but it's down considerably from its recent peak, Carol.
Yeah. I mean, look, I noticed, we didn't air this, but I was watching when we were off camera. I think it was Byron Donalds from Florida mentioned that under President Trump in his first term, gas was less than $2 a gallon. And I went and looked, and because and just as I suspected, yeah, it was under $2 a gallon in the spring of 2020 when the world economy shut down as the pandemic hit. I don't know if that's something to boast about, or if there's a policy that's supposed to bring us back to that point.
Yeah, there's another one that people are mentioning, that it will become a net producer of our own energy again. We make more, we produce more energy than we import. That's been like that under a Democratic and Republican administration. We are a net producer of energy, including fossil fuels. I mean, Biden has actually gotten a lot of grief from the environmental movement because he has approved a number of energy, of fossil fuel extraction projects. Not everywhere, and they're still supporting him, but that's just something that's not true. We produce more than we import. I should say that. We produce more than we import.
Hyperbole that you find at these conventions. And let me wind up and end up with you, Taylor. What's your impression overall? A successful night for the RNC?
I would definitely say so. I mean, especially, you have to wonder what this night would have been like had the assassination attempt not happened on Saturday. Donald Trump, I was at his rally in Florida last Tuesday, and it was a classic Trump campaign rally filled with the very typical messaging of Biden is destroying democracy, Democrats are coming after you, they don't care about you, I am your retribution, and all the criminal charges that I'm facing are an attack. And now the Trump campaign is trying to indicate, at least temporarily, that they want to focus on unity, that they want to really zero in on the fact that they feel Trump was spared on Saturday by some type of a higher being. And the former president has expressed as much in a couple of interviews with the New York Post, with the Washington Examiner. And so it's going to be interesting in the days ahead to see if that sticks and if that kind of changes the tone and tenor of this campaign, or if in a week or two we're kind of back to where things stood. But I also thought having Sean O'Brien here from the Teamsters Union was really representative of how the Republican Party has transformed under Trump. And J.D. Vance, though a vice presidential pick may not sway a ton of voters in November, J.D. Vance has a lot of influence in crafting what the GOP could look like years from now. And a lot of the working class voters that used to be the Democratic base are now either leaning Republican or firmly Republican. And it was a reminder tonight to hear that is kind of the reality.
Yeah, well, it certainly is true that nothing succeeds like success. And a lot of people think that this is a party that's on its way to power, and that certainly accounts for a lot of it. Thank you very much, Taylor Popolars and Josh Robin, Rena Diamante, Alex Cohen, Holly Gregory, Tim Boyum, and Jason Fechner. And thank all of you at home for watching. I'm Errol Lewis. We've got lots more coverage of the RNC. It'll happen all day tomorrow on Spectrum News. And then I'll see you back here tomorrow night for Evening 2 of the RNC. Right now, stay tuned for more news here on Spectrum.
At Spectrum News, we're committed to strengthening the fabric of local communities through our reporting, with stories that inspire and news that matters. Streaming live on your smart TV and connected devices, plus on-demand weather forecasts. It's all there as you step outside with the Spectrum News mobile app, keeping you informed and in the know throughout your day. Spectrum News Plus, local stories connecting communities. Exclusively for Spectrum customers. Now available on your favorite devices.
At Spectrum, our workforce of over 100,000 employees are all located right